Hello, everyone. Welcome to From Nowhere to Nothing, Ontological Oxymorons. I'm your host, Joel Bouchard, a doctoral student in psychology. With me is Mr. Norman Gayford, a professor of English and philosophy. Sometimes, as modern humans, we fail to recognize our complete and total lack of self-sufficiency. Even the most keen outdoors person is often at the mercy of at least primitive technology. A knife, a hatchet, a piece of flint. But strip away all of humanity's tools, and we are faced with the harsh truth. We are a slow, weak, defenseless, and non-resilient species. The one thing we do have, the thing solely responsible for getting us where we are, is our intellect. And while we can identify numerous products of this intellect that are responsible for our ascension, nearly all of them, besides language, come back to our ability to create and use tools.
Well said.
Yeah, so it's sort of an interesting paradox there in the intro. You know, you think about, humans as not being self-sufficient. Well, if we're not self-sufficient, how did we come to dominate the planet? And the answer is through tools. So getting into it, what is a tool?
Well, you know, I always love etymology. And so we go back to the Old English, Germanic base. It means, in that sense, it was two. Sometimes toll or tool. It was tulo, and then got shaped. Too much detail. To make, to prepare, to have a sense of doing or creating something that is going to help you do something else. And so it wasn't specifically to an item, but then we began to say, well, how do you do other things? Well, usually you have items that help you do that.
Yeah. And that's what got me interested in this topic philosophically, is it started with practical considerations, right? I was at work. I work in a manufacturing plant.
Yeah.
And just talking with our engineer and realizing that everything was being referred to as a tool, right? So you had traditional tools, you know, hand tools and stuff. But then he was talking about the mold as a tool. Oh, we need to, remediate this tool. And then, and then pretty soon you realize, man, everything is a tool. And I'm like, well, what is a tool? And then I thought about it a little bit more. I was like, man, even the word tool is weird, right? I was thinking about it, I was like, where does that word come from? Like, to my ears, I can't identify, some sort of Latin or, Germanic origin. And it's really a very ancient word. So it came from there. And, even in your description, right, this is a very broad thing.
Oh, it is.
It's a very broad thing.
Yeah.
So generally, tools are something that we use as sort of a means to an end, right?
Yep.
Is the value of a tool merely its usefulness, or?
Oh, well, this could take me lots of places, because you work in manufacturing among all the other kinds of work that you do. I was raised in the home of a mechanic and a woman who worked in factories and was using tools. I, in my own work over the decades, realized very quickly that everything, well, the pencil, you teach writing, you need to have a stylus of some kind, right? In order to write, you need something to write on. Those are tools. The funny thing is that in conversations with my dad sometimes, I will refer to my toolbox and hold up the phone, and he will say, quite acerbically, but with a sense of humor, no, that's your brains. That's all your young people. I just call that the brain. You just pull out the brain out of your pocket. I'm thinking, okay, this is a toolbox. No, my toolbox is in the garage and it has all kinds of tools and drawers. Yes, and there are drawers on this phone, and so we'll go on and on. But that's just indicative to me of the one level of tools for a mechanic. And yet, he needed to keep those tools clean. Why? Because you always keep your tools clean. Why? Because They work better that way, sure. They also look better. The mechanic who has a shiny box and the tools are fine, is sometimes the mechanic who also doesn't share his tools because other guys come over and just want to grab them because they didn't buy them for themselves. So tools become a proprietarian thing. And so when I was growing up, I saw people, because I worked in my senior year in one of the shops my dad worked in, and I would see guys who hadn't acquired their own tools, and they were just always coming over to take his. And sometimes he'd be benevolent and let him take a tool, but if they didn't, they just kept doing that. He'd say, "You need to acquire your own tools. You need to." He probably didn't say acquire. To get your own tools. You need to have your own. So then it's tools as part of your being. Treat your tools well. Your tools will serve you. There's a whole. So it's not being stingy. It's being. This is part of the work. Is to know your tools.
Right. Yeah. And that's good because you went right where I was hoping you would. It's an important part of it. So, tools, it's not just what they do, but I think that it varies. It probably varies with the tool. I think my mind immediately goes to cars, right? So you can buy, an economy car from East Asia, right? And it would serve you perfectly fine. Or you could buy, a sports car from Italy. And for all intents and purposes, you may use them exactly the same. There might be, some showboating here and there, that sort of thing. But for the most part, you're using it as a tool to provide transportation from one place to the other. But there's completely different considerations that go into choosing the one tool over the other.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And like you said, it comes down to, I think a primary driver in that case would be aesthetics, which is a whole philosophical school.
Even for folks who might not use the word aesthetic, that doesn't matter whether you use the word as a tool to be more precise. But yeah, it looks nice.
Yeah. So there's aesthetics, and then there's also the way that the tool performs. You can look at reliability or gas mileage, which both of those things might be higher in the cheaper car. So in its execution of transporting, the primary purpose of its existence, transporting from one place to another, the quote unquote inferior tool may actually perform better. But there's these other qualities that only, racing a car. How often do you do that in the course of driving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you have a race car, very rarely do you go pedal to the metal. So really interesting how these tools are used and the amount of value, monetarily you put into one over the other. The discrepancy and the reasoning behind that is really kind of fascinating. Another one that's personal to me, right, is guitars.
Sure.
If you look at guitars, technically, if you have a guitar that has the same scale length and the same tone woods and the same pickups, you're going to have a very similar sound. But there's thousands of variations of guitars that do have the same scale length, tone woods, and pickups. So if those three things are sort of determining the sound of a guitar, then why do thousands of variations of it exist, right? It has to do with the color and the shape and, the ergonomics and these other things that play into how the tool executes its
the workmanship,
function.
whether it's handmade guitar or the mass-produced guitar.
Yeah. So is the distinction between a tool and a machine philosophically important?
Well, I thought so, and I vacillated on that over the years. And as I was getting ready for this discussion today, I asked myself that question, a very similar question, and I realized, well, machines are tools, and if we're just going to isolate tools as one distinctive object, well, a machine is an object made up of other objects. Well, a Bic pen is an object made of a very distinct low number of other parts. And so if one is going to start making the distinctions, well, you have to have X number of parts or just one object by itself to be a tool, then I think we get ridiculously categorical and miss the point of the discussion. So yeah, I think machines are tools.
Out of curiosity, now that we brought it up, how would we draw the distinction between a tool and a machine? So I'm guessing you probably haven't looked up the definition of a machine, right? Have you?
I did not look up the definition.
Neither have I. So let's try to come to it on our own, and then maybe we'll look it up.
I'm going to put my tool down.
Because here's the thing that I find interesting, right? When I think of a machine, I think of some kind of animation. There has to be some sort of movement. Now, when you bring up a pen, right, you think of a pen like a push button pen. There's motion there in order for the machine to work.
The ink is delivered by a ball.
Right. But it's put into place. There's a human initiation to it. So, yeah, would a push button pen be a machine or a tool? You know?
Well, I still think it would be a machine because it has you talked about animation. It has movement. However, what moves inside a computer?
Right. Yeah.
Well, the fan.
Yeah. There's a fan that moves.
The electrons.
Yeah, everything else is pretty much electrons.
The rest is I'm old-fashioned. I use a mouse still. Oh my God, how does that sound? I don't particularly like the tap kind of things. That's an aesthetic choice too. It's not. It's a tactile choice, whatever. But moving parts in a computer, really not many, and yet you would.
You would definitely call it a machine.
So a machine implies a process. To me, I think a machine implies a concatenation or structuring of smaller processes to make something bigger happen. A tool might help one accomplish a task. A machine might create something by design. It's been created to produce something after you push the button. But you work with large machines. As I say, my mother worked with them. We all, in some way, encounter large machines. A combine for a farm is a tool to harvest, right? And so there are many other parts that are working in there that are tools addressing smaller processes to make the bigger thing work. So maybe a machine is a combination of tools.
Yeah, it seems pretty apparent there's overlap, right? As a matter of fact, you could probably go as far as to say every machine is a tool, but not every tool is a machine. So I think that's where this distinction would have to be drawn, is looking at, you can't look at, man, that's really difficult.
Well, okay, so now let's extend it into the political, social, and metaphorical. People, for a long time, way before the current conflagration, people referred to politics as a machine. Well, and people as tools of that machine. Right. And Marx and so on talking about capitalism, and people are tools within the larger machine. So people are tools serving the machine. So that puts us in the position of perhaps being tools of helping something else outside of ourselves accomplish something.
Yeah. The thing with machines too is, I mean, if you would take a cog, right? A cog in a machine. A cog by itself isn't really a tool unless you're using it some way that it's not meant to be used. It's pretty useless. But when you throw it into the machine, then it becomes a tool because it interlocks with other cogs that perform a function, right?
This is where teleology arises. Okay, so the teleology, and I know you know the term, but we'll just refresh anybody listening. The teleology is a philosophical approach that asks, what purpose does something serve? It's not worried about the cause of the thing, but rather what purpose it serves. And often teleology will then imply, or did imply for some time, that the serving was toward a good. Oh, okay. So we're talking teleology here when we skew into, a cog. However, a cog can be used to make some really interesting art marks on paper.
Yeah. And there's the phrase, every tool's a hammer, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you could use a cog to smash something and it would be a tool. But
you can use
the purpose, so you have the purpose that it's designed for. If you take the purpose that it's designed for and you remove it from the machine, then it loses its status as a tool. If you're just purely looking at purpose, right? For which it was intended. So yeah, this is sort of, maybe we should read the definition of a machine now. Okay. Now I'm kind of curious.
I'm going to bring up a machine etymology since we are using our tools.
Because we have this interesting thing going on now where machines have tools inside of them, but machines are also tools when used as a whole for their purpose.
From the Greek, mikos, meaning contrivance. Doric Greek, mikana, or mikane, down to French, mid-16th century, machine. And so what it means is deciding or resolving. And it was often used in military senses or in theatrical senses. So the machine means contrivance, an engine, something that is used for deciding or resolving a problem.
So that's interesting, right? That's really pretty wild, because I would expect, you'd be looking into it and you'd have something that has to do with some tool related knowledge, but really it's all about problem solving. And then, so if we bring up like a dictionary definition of a machine.
Yeah.
So a machine is, this is just the first thing, it's Wikipedia right off the top. A machine is any physical system with ordered structural and functional properties. So
we are a machine. Our bodies are a machine in that sense.
Yeah. So really interesting. Contrivance, right? Some means to an end of a tool. So really, I mean, that's why getting down these rabbit holes of etymology is fascinating, because you said an engine, and then my mind's immediately like, what's the difference between an engine and a motor? Is there a difference? Is it just semantics?
An engine drives something. Well, how many different ways can you drive? Well, we're a machine. We're an auto culture. Someday that's going to go away. We are not always going to be an automobile culture, and so all those metaphors are going to spin off into archaic disuse.
Like the save file on computers being a floppy disk, right?
Floppy disk. Is a floppy disk a tool?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. This is why it's really interesting. We may not have established what a tool or a machine is or any of that stuff to this point, but what we have established is that the language of tools and the metaphorical and just the subconscious, the integration of tools into our beings is so deep, right? And that depth kind of leads us into the formative aspects of it. So now we need to look at, okay, well, where did tools, kind of come from? And one of the interesting things I found out when researching tools is that tools actually predate humans themselves. They said that based off of, humans' use of tools and chimpanzees' use of tools and other animals, they said the use of tools probably goes back farther than Homo sapiens does in the historical timeline. So that raises an interesting question, right? Could Homo sapiens be, quote unquote, man without tools?
That's a really, really interesting point. So let's go to the definition of Homo sapiens. What's the basic definition, right? Man who knows, or man who thinks, or being that thinks, something on that order, right? All right. So I suppose we could be Homo sapiens if we could think, but then one would have to say that thinking is itself a tool.
Yeah, because it's something that you're using as a means to an end.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
So,
It's fascinating. I'm glad you read them because, of course, we know of even crows.
Yeah. Crows are prolific tool users.
You've mentioned this before. Bring this up again because we talked about this in a different context.
Yeah.
Crows pay attention. Crows are attentive. Crows know how many people go into a building and how many people come back out, whether there's still somebody there. Crows will use a stick to accomplish a lot of different things.
Yeah, if you put something in the bottom of a pitcher and it can't reach it, it'll drop rocks into the water until it raises the water level so it can get to the thing. Very complex use of this sort of logic.
Homo sapiens, wise humans. Well, what makes one wise? Survival? I don't know. Is it wise to survive?
Yeah. Yeah, in the scheme of things. So as a thought experiment, right? Let's go back. Let's find our first anatomically correct human being, right?
All right.
At the dawn of time. So
why is it never the noon of time?
Yeah, where was the noon of time? I don't know. We haven't reached the end of it yet, so we don't know where noon is, I guess. Well, I mean, I guess at that point, right? So if tools predate humans, then the first man probably already had tools. So
yes, the exciting. See, I'm saying yes because so philosophy asks us when we think about time, because I'm always reading about time, right? That they demands really of us now to realize that we are not the be-all, end-all. We are not born and then everything starts with us, and when we're done, it's done. No, of course not. We know this, really. But we are essentially thrown into a flux, a set of processes, multiple systems, in which we ping-pong around like some kind of video game. And we do things, and we hope those things will have good results. And sometimes we just do things and ask an adult sometimes, why'd you do that? I don't know. And so we just are creatures of action. And time doesn't, we may have in fact created the idea of time. We did create the idea of time. But if we are creatures that just fall into things, and the first fully functioning human, let's go to our model, has to be observant, one hopes, and saw perhaps beaver-like creatures building dams. What were they using? Their teeth, and their paws, or to see a crow and manipulating something with a stick. Lightning strikes and there's fire. Wow, the gods gave us that. But wait a minute, why did that happen? And sooner or later, there are tools around. You're just going to figure them out.
Yeah, so you cannot separate man from tools, because not only did tools predate men, we were probably using tools when we became modern humans. But also, like you said, tools are inextricably linked to intellect, which is an inherent aspect of being human.
Yeah.
So, man, I had another thing I was going to add.
I went too far on that.
I can't remember what it was.
It'll come back.
Yeah. So, what were some major milestones in tool use throughout history?
Oh, geez. Well, let's really dive into the rabbit hole. What is a milestone? It is a tool for what?
Marking miles.
Yes, marking distance. So if we're implying the metaphorical use of milestone, it means we've come a certain way. And so what? I can walk from Warsaw to Perry. It's going to take a lot longer than to drive, but what does that mean? Has that been a change? But a milestone, we use it to imply that something significant has happened. Well, somewhere along the line, somebody, as you said before, figured out flint. And we know we categorize things by the metals that were, or the combination of metals. So we have the Stone Age, which is not metal, but metal in there somewhere. The Iron Age, where we figure out how to extricate metal. And anyway, so the very fact that we categorize by the material that we are using to make tools implies that the tools were present in a potential sense. Not that, so I'm not implying that, well, gee, everything, the hammers, wrenches, all that was just lying around under the dirt. When humans got smart enough, they brushed the dirt off and they found their tool. There was a need. There was a purpose that needed addressing. How do you best address things? Let's Cain and Abel. Let's see. What was at hand? A stone, presumably. That's the murder weapon. A stone can be used to kill. A stone can be used to build. A stone can be. So now we're getting teleological again. What is was a stone? Was the cause of a stone for death or for building? I don't think one can say there was a cause. The cause was that volcanic or pressures or glaciers left this object to us. Maybe we never touched the object, but when we pick it up and we look at it and we start to say, oh, gee, good rhythm. Well, crows, squirrels use nuts and make rhythm. That's not their intent. They're trying to get the meat out of the nut, but still, mighty good drumming sometimes. Woodpeckers. Do you listen to woodpeckers and say, oh, music? Or why are they doing, so they peck into that. Well, I don't have a nose that can do that. I'm just extrapolating like crazy here. But I think that's how humans work.
Yeah, and you sent me a really good article expressing that exact thing before we did the episode where the philosopher was essentially saying, we think of tools as having a purpose, but really that's a backwards way of thinking about it. Really, we have a purpose and we create tools to fulfill that purpose.
And sometimes we going back to your hammer, everything's a hammer. And sometimes if you're trying to get something taken apart, I confess, I don't know how many other people would say this, but I think we recognize it. If I don't have a hammer at hand and I need to get a nail down in the floor so somebody else doesn't get cut on it, but I have a stone over here for my rock collection, bam, I might wreck the stone, but the nail went down in. Right. So suddenly the purpose of that stone is multiple.
Yeah. And, so if we think about it that way, then really tools, like we mentioned earlier, right? The intellect is the tool, right? Because we have a purpose. We have to figure out a way to accomplish that purpose. And the tools originate within our mind. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of like a Rube Goldberg machine, right?
Yeah.
It's not really accomplishing much of anything, no. But at the same time, it's accomplishing a lot. And it's starting in somebody's imagination somewhere. And really, that's all it is just an exercise of the imagination.
Projecting, yes.
Yeah. And so when we think about like milestones in tool use, right? I can't remember if I mentioned it on the air before, but I know you and I have talked about it. The thing that was fascinating to me, I watched a documentary on was Neanderthals and how humans ended up, essentially wiping out Neanderthals, or Neanderthals went extinct. And what they found was the difference between the humans and the Neanderthals was in adaptability, right? So at some point, they both developed stone tools, whether it was independently or maybe the Neanderthals stole the technology, whatever it was, they both had stone tools. But then if you look at human and Neanderthal tools, decades and centuries apart, what you see is the Neanderthal tools stay exactly the same, but the human tools evolved. They became sharper. They became, more streamlined. They had better ways of affixing the stone tools to handles. They had all these other things until eventually they were just so much more effective that Neanderthals could not compete. So,
and yet we have we have tangible, I won't say lots. You just brought this thought to mind. We have Neanderthal DNA.
Right.
in our genome.
Yeah.
And not much. I was looking up very clearly, 1 to 2%. But those beings are still with us.
Yeah.
And they did make tools. They didn't make as rapid change as we did. They didn't adapt as much as we did. But, if you call somebody Neanderthal and you think you're insulting them, I don't find that an insultive word. There's another being. It happened not to survive.
Right. And here's an interesting thing that just occurred to me too when you were mentioning, when we were talking about purpose, right? What is purpose? Survival? Well, if you think about it, let's think about it for a second, right? So humans survived and Neanderthals did not. So that would appear to be a success, right? But let's assume that Neanderthals would have stayed on the course they were on, right? Things would have been staying the status quo. Well, humans have gone on and made all of these inventions. We have these milestones, right? Well, the milestones originally start out pretty positive, right? You have the Stone Age, you have the Bronze Age, you have the Iron Age. But then you have the Industrial Revolution, and then you have the Nuclear Age and these sorts of things. Which again, you can't say that there aren't, there's positive things that came from them. But when you look at it from a purpose of survival, right? Do you think that those things are aiding the human ability to survive in the long term versus a hunter-gatherer society?
Yeah.
Who would have, if you had two separate worlds, one with only humans and one with only Neanderthals, which species do you think would survive farther into the future? It's an interesting sort of thought experiment.
It's an interesting thought experiment and very worthy, because I think that the fossil record, the anthropological record, archaeological record would, in my reading experience, suggest that they weren't completely static. They just weren't moving at the pace that we were. So there would have been changes. There would have been adaptations. They probably would have been slower. We didn't need combustion engines. In 150 years, we've essentially laid waste in high potential parts of the planet for the purposes of going fast. Why? Because we got to get there faster. Why? Because we can see more people. Why? And I love being people say, oh, don't be a child. You keep asking why. Well, of course they ask why. We need to ask why. What purpose did it serve? What purpose does it serve? Well, everybody needs a car. Well, why? And we find out that we are a collective ourselves who reject, collections of human beings reject certain tools and accept certain tools. We castigate them and we use them at the same time. We are marvelous hypocrites. And so we'll say, well, we need cars. Why? Because we don't have mass transit. Would you ride mass transit if you had it? I'm not going to get on a subway. I'm not going to get on a bus. I've had so many conversations with people like,
right.
No. Why? Because it's independence. I get to go where I want to go when I want to go there. But then you get upset when gasoline costs what it should cost because of the manufacturing processes and so on. And you get really upset that, gee, maybe that causes you to have to make a choice between where you go and how long you go. And suddenly that's an impingement on a freedom that didn't exist 150 years ago.
Right. And that's sort of the interesting part of humanity, right? Is that we have this drive to be explorers and to be adventurers and to be on the cutting edge of things. But sometimes we're almost tripping over our feet in how to use these processes. And gasoline is actually a really good example, right? In the human history of refining oil, there was a time where they found oil had a purpose, right? And so they refined it. And then they just kind of burned off all the byproducts. Well, some of those byproducts were gasoline, butane, all these different things. And over time, decades or centuries later, somebody would discover, oh, well, this is actually a very useful, valuable commodity. But for hundreds of years, you had just been wasting it and in the process affecting the environment, right? So, and human history is sort of filled with those types of stories, right? Of us discovering something and immediately putting it to use. But we don't really have a full understanding of what it's doing, and
and it's so that's true. And when we realize, if we can admit that it's just as true now, then that is a positive step. I'm just listening to it and thinking, so often I just think of, I've said this in classrooms and other, where we're barely out of the caves. And in a time sense, that we've created the measures of time, then that's true. Compared to galactic scales, we're barely out of the caves. We're awakening to things that we wouldn't have given a thought to 3 generations ago, or 2 generations ago. And so a lot of this shouldn't be new, but it is. And so the crux point is, do we use the tool of our intellect in order to say, why, which is a very important tool question. Why would I do this when I could do that? Measure how many times and then cut once?
Yeah.
Measure twice? Sometimes people say measure thrice and then cut once. Why? Because once something's cut, you can't go.
Yeah. And again, like that paradoxical nature of humans, right? You think about climate change, right? A lot of people resist green energy for various reasons. That largely boiled down to what you were saying previously, which was that there's this strange sort of circular argument of, well, we don't have the things to make it work. Well, if we did have things to make it work, would you support it? No, because this is ingrained. But then there's climate things that are becoming very real, right? You have your doomsday glacier that's about to melt and raise the sea levels by 2 feet. So then what is the solution? The solution isn't to fix the root cause of the problem, but to find ways to geoengineer to reduce the impacts. So it's to create more tools, right? To go further into the future rather than revisiting the past and reflecting on what we are already doing in order to make it more efficient or more useful.
One could argue we are being Neanderthals in the specific sense of when we when we think we've achieved the best moment, and so there's nowhere else to go with it.
Yeah.
All right. I think of the devastation of, which sounds easy to say, right? It's an intellectual thing to say, but the devastation, the human toll of coal mining, black lung, and death, and on scales that shouldn't, and suffering. And yet some of the very folks who've suffered through that in multiple generations of families will still defend unto death the idea that we've got to have coal. Why? Because it's work. And so then there's no necessarily generative thought about, but what other work would we be able to learn and to do to be supportive, maybe not to have to encounter such medical issues. But that just runs into the wall. But we've always done this. But in fact, we probably haven't always done this in the historical record.
Right. Yeah. And then you see this on a company-wide level, especially in something like manufacturing, right? Right now, there's a huge supply chain crunch. So there's a lot of things that aren't available. And so you see different customers approaching that different ways. You have some customers that say, well, this is our product. This is what we know works. So we're only going to accept this. So as a result, things will be on hold for a long period of time. And, they'll be scarce. And then you have other customers that are saying, okay, well, if this isn't available, what is? Well, we have this polymer instead. Well, okay, could we, essentially that's the same thing, but with a lower gel content. Could we use a different processing aid to make that work? Yeah, we could,
and creative thinking.
Right. And it's and when you extend that into things that are more ecological and in a lot of cases more cost effective, you make progress into the future. And from what I've seen on a personal basis, some companies are willing to do that and some are not. And it's having a major effect on humanity in the current moment that we're in.
In the situation you were just describing, as we thinking about tools, are you using the same machines to create those other things with different polymers? But is it still the same machinery?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So it's using. If we go with tool and machine, it's using one into the other that already exists, but yet creating something new with it or something alternative with it.
Right. And there's a process that goes into that. You never just replace one thing with another and things go well. You might come back and say, okay, well, we're going to have to adjust the heat of a press, or we're going to have to adjust how fast the press injects the material, or how long the press cooks the material, or you'll have to adjust a number of different parameters in order to get it to perform and produce the same thing that the other thing would have.
Research.
Right.
And development.
Experimentation, yes. So there's these things that go into it. So leading that into sort of the speculative portion, do you think a tool or a machine can become so effective that it performs innately human tasks better than humans?
Well, that depends entirely on the definition of better for me. I know I'm annoying. I'm so annoying because it's the word. It's always what do we mean by better? Do we mean faster? I'm just asking if you want to toss that in or shape it, or you just want to stay with the word better.
No, I think it's a good question, because this sort of question leads directly into artificial intelligence, really. And so if we're asking, can a tool or a machine become more effective than humans at human tasks, we can look at examples of it. And then, everybody's read like an AI generated article, right? Mm-hmm. And did the AI do it faster than a human? Absolutely. Did the AI have more facts than the human? Absolutely. But did it have the sort of feel or the flow that gave you the sort of thing that it worked well? No, probably not. So did it accomplish it better? Well, again, like you said, it comes down to the definition of better.
There's an AI artist now in a robot form named Ada. It's really interesting. Or just side note, pop culture, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Rogue scientist invents somebody that is called Ada, and she's an android. And we just love, we just do this stuff. So, but this is there were issues of shipping Ada to Spain for an art presentation and conference because they had some ethical issues. They also had some legal issues about what kind of machinery you can ship. We're crossing into those zones now. All right, Ada has done interviews. Well, it's artificial intelligence generating conversation and response to questions that a human asks, and does painting. And then people say, that's not art. Well, I'm an artist. I practice art. I'm not so completely convinced that it's not art. Is it doing better art than humans? Well, there's all kinds of room for all kinds of art. You can never have enough art, so that's really not a necessary question for me on that. All right, that's a long digression. What do we mean by better? If we mean by better, you said effective. We shifted from better to effective. Does effective mean fewer mistakes? And proportionately or on scale? Does effective mean that plus faster? There are one I think could argue that yes, that is done in manufacturing. The idea way back that was bantered around philosophically and politically was, well, at least on the surface, was, well, when we replace people with machines doing the drudge work that they don't have to do, that gives them more time to explore their own humanity. That hasn't played out so much because now we got people living 2 and 3 jobs and barely able to keep their eyes open. and we want them to be attentive to what's going on around them. That's pretty much a big ask. And so what we've done is abuse people more, but that's not the machines. And people love to blame the machines. It's not the machines. Machines, until they are an ADA, don't seem to have intent.
Yeah. You have, famous economists like Adam Smith and some of these other guys who said, in the future, humans will probably only have to work, 20 hours a week or something. Because you'll have, like you said, you'll have machines doing this grudge work. Well, I think what they failed to take into account looking at this is how much humans would consume in the future, right? Because if you think about, well, why aren't we? Why aren't we working 20 hours a week, right? Why are we working more than we ever were? What are we doing? It's really this need to consume. And if you have a need to consume, then you have a need to create products. If you have a need to create products, then you have an expanded economy. You have an expanded.
And now you're in the marvelous danger zone. Thank you very much for taking us there. And where does the need to consume at such levels come from? From the patriotic demand that in order to support your culture, you buy things. You buy things to the point of breaking your own bank account and owing things for a lifetime. Why? Because you need every one of those things. Do you really need every one of those things? Do any of us have things we really never needed that we bought? We're serving an economy, which is a beast, which is metaphorically, which is a machine, which says this is the way to do it. If you want to have freedom, you must be indentured to the economy. That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
And that's not the fault of the machine, and it's not the fault of the tools. What fault does a tool bear? Does a tool bear any responsibility for its use?
Yeah, I think as we discussed earlier in the episode, right? We have a purpose and we create tools for those purposes. But a tool inherently is devoid of purpose because it's just an object, right? Like you said with the stone just exists, and a human decides whether to use it as a hammer or a percussion element or a building block or these sorts of things.
And if we corporately, corporations, companies, medium, small, large, whatever, make decisions to put tools in place that reduce the cost of their workforce without giving any thought to what other things the humans could be doing and paying them what would be a living wage in order to do those things, that's what undermines the intent of the tool potentially in the first place. If your intent was to diminish your workforce so you can have even more money for yourself, then you're removing the human concern and the human ethical responsibility. The old notions were based on the idea that, you'd work 20 hours a week and could better yourself because you'd be making enough money that you wouldn't have to be laboring all the time. But we haven't abandoned the notion that you're supposed to work 9 to 5. Now we've shattered that entirely. Now you're supposed to work all the time. You're not a good American.
Yeah, there's this strange shift, right, in perspective, where work is the defining characteristic of humanity, right?
In this culture.
Yeah, and nothing makes you more of a cog in a machine than having that attitude. Because, like you said, that it is becoming, you have to think, well, what am I working for, right? What are you working for if you don't have time to yourself? What are you working for if you can't supply yourself or your family with the things that you believe you need, right? So what is the purpose of this, right? What is the purpose of living, right? If you're just, this is what you do, this is your job.
And all of this comes out of the word tool.
Yeah. So there's that side of it, which is, tool use and the human work part of it. Coming back to the original question that I asked, there's an important element in there that I was thinking of when I wrote it, and that was, can a tool or machine become so effective it performs innately human tasks better than humans? So now what we're thinking of is kind of where we were at the beginning. I think the artist was a good example, right? Art is something that is maybe innately human
I think it is.
I think it is because animals might create art, but they're not creating it purely for an aesthetic.
Yeah, not for the intent.
Yeah.
Necessarily.
Yeah. So we have AI, right? So we have this AI. I'm assuming Ada. I don't really know anything about it, but I'm assuming they probably fed it all of Picasso's work, all of Monet's work, all of the Rembrandt, probably fed it all of these works of art and then said, hey, make something based off of all of the human history of art, create something. And it does, right? So from that standpoint, it's studied every style, every brushstroke, every use of color, all of these things, and it creates something. And again, we have those words, better. We have the word effective. We have these things that are difficult to define.
It can't be more effective. And if it were equally effective, so what? That more effective implies, well, it's more artistic than any other artist, or that, well, of course, there are levels of how we would. There's endless philosophy about aesthetics. We won't go into that, but as I said, there's plenty of room. I love graphic novels. I love illustration. I love cubism from the early 20th century. I can appreciate all those things. I can appreciate something that Ada made. Does that mean that Ada wipes out art? Nonsense. The art goes back to the cave paintings that we. So I think but there's that fear. Well, gee, are you going to hand all your brushes and you're never going to buy any brushes and paint yourself? Oh, I've been outdone by a machine. So, what do? We study art. Maybe we can't study every little kind of art because we don't have the mental capacity or the time. And it's, as you said, can be fed in. But ultimately, if we look at Van Gogh and we look at I don't know, Frida Kahlo and the rest, does that mean they may have some effect on us? Undeniably, because we're studying how they did things.
Yeah, I think why the question is kind of unanswerable is if you think about better or effective and you think about aesthetics, what you realize about aesthetics is that those sorts of characterizations are so personal, right? What makes a painting effective essentially comes down to the emotional connection that an audience is going to have with the work. And every single person, as an audience of one, is going to have a different emotional connection to different works of art. So there's a very good chance, without anybody taking away the preconceived biases of it being an AI, if you just presented one of Ada's paintings alongside a human-generated painting and didn't provide the person any input, there'd be some people that would say Ada's painting is a better painting because it gives them an emotional connection. And there'd be people that say the human painting is a better painting because it gives them a different connection. So it's a very, it's something that's very unique to an individual person. So I think art is...
off the table.
Yeah. Right. So let's go to another one. I read this just yesterday, right? There was some scientists that they wanted to have an AI answer the question. Let me think, what was it now? Shoot, I should really look up the article because I'm probably going to say something that's not right. But they wanted to have an AI answer the question if AI was going to be, essentially, if AI was going to be dangerous to humans, right? Because this is our sort of fear, right? That's been propagated through science fiction and Elon Musk and everybody else, is that AI is going to get so smart that it's going to enslave humanity, right? So they asked a similar question to the AI, and basically what the AI told them is what we've discussed this whole episode, which is that AI is just a tool of humans and it's going to do whatever the humans ask. And it said, well, how can we guarantee that AI is going to give us good outcomes? And they said, you can't guarantee that. You just have, humans have to set the correct parameters. Mm-hmm. And again, they had fed this thing with all of the knowledge of humanity, and these are the answers that came out with. And I mean, it's very logical, right? Right off the bat, you're like, no, this just makes sense, right? Can we create AI that can do these things that are far beyond what humans can possibly imagine? Absolutely. Yeah. Can we guarantee that AI isn't going to take a bad turn? Only if we ensure that we set it off on the right foot.
Yes. Is there ever a guarantee that a hammer is totally safe? Is there ever a guarantee that a toolbox is not going to harm you? And no, we're human beings. We stumble into all sorts of crap. We do this stuff. I think that's really interesting. I want to read that article.
Yeah, I'll find it. I'll find it and I'll send it to you. So the last question I'll ask is this: which is more impactful on humanity, us creating tools or tools shaping us?
Oh, that's an interesting question, Joel.
Obviously, it's more important that we created tools, because if we didn't create tools, they wouldn't exist. But what's more impactful, us creating those tools or how those tools end up shaping how we live our lives?
Longer term, I would have to say as one person, the second. Because the ramifications of, well, just as an example, automobiles. When they were created, it is, I think, singularly doubtful that anybody gave a thought to anything on a planetary scale other than sales. But we are seeing the results of our choices. And sometimes those choices have been necessitated by geography and the current system of employment and. But I think the second part is...
Yeah, what I think about is it comes back to you and your dad talking, right? And he called your phone your brain, right? And you're saying, no, it's a toolbox. Well, there's been studies on this that have looked at it. And, what they've said is that, there's this fear that smartphones and things are making people dumber. They said, no, what's happening is just that you used to require a lot of this sort of semantic memory. You had to remember all of the phone numbers that people had. You had to do all this stuff. Technology has made it so that you don't have to do that anymore, so that you can use your brain for higher order functions, right? So it's not that if we have a giant solar flare tomorrow and all the technology's fried, we could go back to memorizing all the numbers. The mental capacity is still there.
And we still have books.
Right.
We haven't gotten rid of them entirely.
Yeah, there's always going to be some kind of technology. There's always going to be some kind of tools that will help us out with things. But really, what humans are very good at is tailoring their mental capacities and processes to the tools that they have and using them effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So
I also said to him, and we'll continue to say this isn't a brain, really. This is the Library of Alexandria, right into the 21st century. This is access to unlimited libraries. And if you are trying to be adept using the tool or the tools, then you have to think really creatively about research. You have to think about how you ask a question. It makes us better question askers in prospect than we may ever have been before.
Right. And I'm sure, as and the speed of technology, right? You talked about it earlier. Like, I can remember a time before the internet was a household thing, right? And I am not an old person.
No.
But I'm sure you, as somebody who's been in education your whole life, can remember this, because I can remember it when I was just getting into college. Mm-hmm. People saying, well, kids these days, they can just look stuff up on the internet. I remember when I had to search through the card catalog and I had to do all this, as if that somehow made you a better student, right? No, you just had to go through more steps to find the same information.
Yeah, and really, it's still the same process. What terms are you looking for? How do you look them up? Yeah. No, it's not a badge of honor. This is I do own a tool, a record player, which can play 78s, 45s, 33s. Some people might not even know what I'm talking about by saying that. Which also has a CD player, which has a radio. All of those are essentially outmoded technologies in some people's minds. And the fact that I can use them, does that mean I don't use Spotify? I can't link it? Of course not. Does having some aptitude with an older tool automatically excise you from the group of current knowledge? Of course not. That's all sociological. That's not required by the tool.
Yeah, because there's different purposes for these tools, right? Spotify, in large part, it's that mobility, right? I can listen to this anywhere. But
it's also the space saving.
Yeah. But me and my wife, when we go to decorate the Christmas tree, we throw Bing Crosby on the record player. And granted, we don't know anything about records, so we did have to go through all the different sizes. Originally, he sounded like he was on the Chipmunks. And then nope, that's not the right size. We keep changing. Okay, so this one's actually a 33. And then we play it. But that crackly record hiss and, the inability of the vinyl medium to over compress things and these sorts of stuff, it provides you with a certain feel. And that tool has a different purpose than an MP3 or a tape or a CD or any of those other things. So they are all different tools. They all do have different purposes. And so even though as humans, we think of one as replacing the other, it's really replacing some of those functions, some of those purposes. But a lot of tools never really become obsolete. And even hand tools, right? You can go back and you can look at planers or chisels or some of these things and say, all right, maybe we do have tools that have replaced these, but these still do a certain thing better than the newer tools do. Yeah. And that's kind of the fascinating function of them. We've really just scratched the surface. And I think we should do a whole episode on technology and maybe machines and automation and some of these other things. But it was a fun discussion. So until next time, keep pondering.